I'd like to introduce you to our first panel discussion of the day. This is called How High-Performing Workplaces Can Show Compassion Too. This discussion will talk about how competitive, innovative business can still deliver empathy and compassion in order to engage and retain employees. This panel is going to be moderated by our very own Steve Koepp. He's a co-founder and chief content officer at From Day One and a veteran journalist. Please welcome Steve, who will introduce the rest of the panel.
We're going to talk about that tension and that balance between, okay folks, come on out, between being productive and being high performance as people are expected to be these days, and also just as managers having some empathy for them as individuals, what their challenges are, what their skills are, and trying to strike some balance. And in the world of hybrid work, when we're not all necessarily all in the office together, it's even more important to be able to balance those two things. So we have an excellent panel here, and I think we'll start out just by having each of them introduce themselves, where they work, and what they do there, starting with you. We'll go from right to left.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Bomrad. I have been fortunate enough to have a career helping startups, turnarounds, and high-growth organizations align their people and their business strategies together. For me, a key driver has always been around humanizing the workplace while still helping leaders create business results. I currently head up the HR team for Homethrive, which is a health tech company that helps other organizations create compassionate cultures and improve the employee experience through our unique caregiver support platform. So I am a Chicago native, kind of on a personal note, Chicago native who is really just passionate around leveling the playing field and helping people to, sorry, I'm so nervous. I haven't been in public in like 2 years, I feel like. I was like, is it just me? But helping people to succeed.
It's kind of surreal, isn't it?
It really is. I'm like, oh, where am I? I just go back to hiding under my dining room table right after this.
Good morning. My name is Chris Doucet. I oversee employee engagement, our charitable foundation, as well as internal communications at Ace Hardware. So I hope you've all been to your local Ace Hardware. But our global headquarters are here in Oak Brook, just outside the city. So.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Versino from Zurich North America. We're a large global insurer, and I've been there about 10 years, and right now I head up our manager development and talent development. So this topic is very, very something close to my heart, not only because I do that at Zurich, but also I am a executive leadership coach, and my specialty is around high-performing teams. So I've had a lot of experience doing that. I totally relate because I haven't been on a train in 3 years, and I was like all ready to go this morning, and I set my alarm, and I get up, and it is 7:30 for an 8:13 train. So I made it. So that's a success for today. So if nothing else goes well today, it has been a success.
Not only did you make it, but you look amazing. Like you pulled this off. I'm totally impressed. Hi, everyone. I'm Shan, co-founder of Bravely. We are a platform that connects employees to confidential coaching throughout their employee experience. We are trying to really turn the traditional model of coaching on its head, and we're doing that by offering our platform to all employees. So companies like the New York Times, Pinterest, Autodesk, Zillow Group, every single one of their employees has access to Bravely. Anyone that's participated in coaching or seen other people at their organization get access to coaching, it's typically only reserved for senior level executives who, as we know, are typically not the most diverse set of individuals. And then more recently, we've seen it go to high performers or people that are in management roles, which is also very subjective and doesn't fulfill our mission, which is to provide equitable access. So I'm super excited to be here. As you can imagine, we're helping other companies develop their culture, so I have to do the same for mine. I'm so excited to learn from everyone here.
All right, and good morning, everyone. My name is Flournoy. I am the Vice President of People and Culture Development for a company called Aurora, which nobody's heard of. But Aurora is one of the companies that's making the technology behind 100% self-driving trucks and cars. And so we actually have trucks on the road in Texas that are going from Dallas to El Paso and back with no one driving. So watch out. And but in my job, I oversee diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as learning and development. In addition, I also have my own company called Creative Outreach Consulting, which I'm an executive coach. I do training and development for a lot of companies like Sony, AbbVie, to help companies figure out and navigate this whole DEI and team effectiveness stuff. So that's what I do when I'm not doing the full-time job. So.
Thanks, Corey.
In your spare time.
All right, I'll fire off the first question here, starting with Melissa. So is it possible to set high expectations for performance while still having empathy for what individuals can deliver based on their own, unique skills and life situations and all those things?
Yeah, I think it's not just possible, it's necessary. So when you think about a high-performing team, and we talked a little bit already about diversity, the importance of that, to really be able to create a mechanism where you can achieve those sustainable results, you can be innovative, you can hit your business outcomes, I think it's a direct result of leading with compassion and empathy. It's not actually at odds with it. And I think sometimes people think it is at odds, and I think that's maybe a little bit older school thinking, I might say, but I think empathy is a power skill at Zurich. It's something that we're very focused on, and we know that the importance that drives, and I love the thought of empathy as sort of an emotion, right? It's feeling something, and then compassion is an action. It's an action that you try to actually alleviate someone's emotion, their suffering. So I think those two things together are really important. And as I've coached leaders to build high-performing teams, I've learned two really important things. One, performance starts with people. So you have to take care of your people. And two, when you think about the team, they achieve those sustainable high-performing results either together or not at all, because you have to work together. And so I think from a high-performing team perspective, there's a high sense of collaboration, there's a high sense of synergy, where each unique talent and strength of every team member actually builds on top of each other and creates this really productive, powerful environment where you're actually way better collectively than any individual person is. And I think when you can unlock someone's potential, you actually unleash their productivity and their performance. And you do this by activating those unique strengths and actually allowing them to bring those strengths and be true to themselves, creates that diverse and inclusive environment where people actually perform way better than they would if you just kind of put them in a role where you couldn't use those strengths. I think you've all been there, right? We're not actually using those strengths as much as we like. We feel that. We know when that's true. I think we've all also worked for leaders who diminish us. They may diminish our strengths. They may be quick to blame or criticize us. They're not really activating those strengths or abilities that we have. They're stingy with recognition. And really all those leaders do is inspire fear, doubt, or potentially us to leave the organization. And so when you think about a leader, they should be building us up. They should be activating those strengths so that we can perform and not tearing us down and giving us feedback that maybe isn't super productive or helping us figure out how to really activate those strengths. And so I think, when I coach people who have worked for leaders like this, I see a few things. I see a lack of confidence. I see a lot of self-doubt, and that actually leads to reduced productivity and performance, because what happens is they start second-guessing themselves, they start doubting themselves, and they overwork because they're so afraid of failure, they're so afraid of making a mistake, because when they've done that before, they've gotten in trouble, they've gotten penalized, versus really nurtured and understanding when it's safe to make mistakes and learn from them. And so while I think ultimately you can take care of your people, they're going to take care of their work and your customer. So we need to do that. And if you don't drive performance in combination with empathy and compassion, you're going to get some short-term results for sure. But you're not going to get long-term sustainable outcomes, because eventually your people are going to be burnt out. They're not going to be acknowledged, and they're going to eventually leave the organization, which I think almost all organizations right now are dealing with. How do we retain that talent?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks, Melissa. Sarah, you see this from two perspectives. One is at your own company, and then also kind of across the spectrum of other companies. And what patterns do you see here in terms of companies, managers trying to navigate this?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it was that HR and people, and this never stopped for everyone in this room, were tasked with solving all the world's problems. And then it got passed to managers. And I think most managers really struggle with the equity piece of compassion. So what I mean by that is, if I give flexibility to one person and not the other, how does this disrupt my team dynamic? Or how do I show compassion and then still meet my goals? I mean, these are things even that I as a founder of my company can struggle with, right? Like if I extend all of this compassion and give people the agency to do what they feel like they need, will I still actually get to the end goal that I'm driving towards? So I think first and foremost, companies have to really put the process and procedures in place for their managers to say, these are the guardrails in which you can operate, and then give them the agency to then take it as far as they need. So there was someone on my team recently in the last COVID wave who's a single mother. 2 of her children had to be out of school during this time. And I made the decision that I was going to give her a lot more flexibility at this point than I was other people on her team. And I think that's the right choice, but we have to make sure that we're enabling that inside our organization, because I think what starts to happen is that people don't know what to do, managers in particular, and then they pile on stress to their own plate. And the clarity, I think Brene Brown is the one that says this, and I say it all the time, clarity is kindness. So when we give people the guardrails, but then trust them to make their own decisions, that's when we create these healthy cultures. And the compassion piece is just imperative. Like employees demand it now. It's no longer acceptable to not extend support to your people, and they will leave, as you just shared. I mean, we're all seeing it, we're all feeling it. So I think that, again, it's empowering managers, but building it within your culture through the policies that you have in place.
Thanks, Sarah. Corey, in terms of like teaching managers how to do this, especially if they're first-time managers, what's a good approach to in terms of like trying to create human-centered managers?
So I guess a few things. One thing I think is sometimes, and I used to work at Groupon and now I work at this company, I think sometimes we think that this starts at the manager level, and actually it starts at the top of the organization. People model the behaviors that they see the executive teams doing, and if the CEO and others are empathetic, I think managers know they have the opportunity, but if the CEO and others are so driven towards profits and everything else, and they don't see the human side, that also lets you know as a manager that you possibly can't afford to spend that much time on people. And so I think it starts at the top. That's one. 2, I think it's important that we have to move companies from thinking there's a disconnection between either you focus on the business or you focus on people. The two have to be connected. We're trying to get a product out the door. We have some aggressive goals we have to hit. And so the only way we're going to do that is if we have people who work together, listen to each other, and we're able to bring a diversity of viewpoints into the room. So we have to get companies to recognize these things are connected. So when I think about actual solutions, so here's a few things. I think for managers, rather new manager, or whatever they are in their process, people have to know where they are in their journey of how you show up for people. What I mean by that is, I don't know how many of you have ever taken the intercultural development inventory. Have any of you taken it? A few hands, great. And so for those who haven't, it is actually an assessment that lets you know where you are on your cultural journey. And because it's a competence, it means that no matter where you are, you can still develop the skill sets and experiences to move greater in that journey. Most people are in minimalization, which means we focus on what makes us the same versus what makes us different, which sounds good, except when I don't recognize there's a difference between you and me, and you have different lived experiences as a woman versus a guy, then we fail to show up for each other. And so I think part of that work is letting managers and others do the work, understanding where you are in your cultural growth, because if you score a minimization or polarization, that means that's how you manage. You manage people by either ignoring what differences they bring to the table in their experiences. You think about promotions and how you show up and help people. You recognize that you may not even recognize that you're giving greater opportunities to people who are more like you than people who are not like you. So I think that's first thing, is thinking about that part of the journey. Second, I think we have to give managers the understanding of, you have to first understand who you are and how you show up and how you behave and what's important to you, to be able to figure out how do I know that and then work with someone else who's different than me. The other thing I find is crazy is that people tend to manage people the way they like to be managed. And very rarely are the things the same. So I have people who love being aggressive and love being yelled at. That's how they get motivated. And when they do that to the employee, they're surprised when the employees quit, because that's not how they want to be managed. And so, again, I do a lot of work within my own company and consulting and helping people understand what that means and how to show up. And the last thing I would say is about having managers have empathy and understanding is, there's a lot of research done on this, something called the ACE model. In this ACE model, each of those letters stand for a different 6 qualities that are needed to be successful. They either start with A, C, A, D, like ability, executive presence. So the research has shown that the greater the difference between myself and you, so if I'm if I'm a homosexual black man who's 48, whatever, 47. Anyway, and I'm working with someone who is different, who is younger, who is a different gender, who was raised from somewhat different, we actually see the world differently. And when it comes to how we evaluate our work performance, there's a greater opportunity for us to have differences of opinion on how we judge people and how they show up. And so the ACE model allows you to kind of take this opportunity where you rank how you think you did, I rank how I think you did, and we look at the difference and have discussions about what we have a difference in opinion. And when you have those conversations, it allows you to have greater empathy, like, wow, you're really working hard, but I didn't see that. I didn't see the work and the time you put into as being the same, and that's part of that difference, the cultural differences we have on how we show up and see the world.
Well, thanks, Corey. What is that model you mentioned? It's called the what model?
The ACE model, ACE model.
Nothing to do with me.
I'm sorry?
Nothing to do with Ace Hardware.
No, not you. No. But it's,
Just
and again,
clear.
and you can Google it really quickly, but it's, and I'll find it even during the break, but each of those letters stand for like the 6 things that are needed to actually grow your career as an executive.
All right.
So like executive presence, ambition, and again,
We always do a follow-up story, and I wanted to make sure we got that right.
more than happy to
So-
share the information.
Sounds great. I wanted to get into like managers of connective tissue, so people know what's going on. But before we move on to that, Chris, Lisa, did you want to add anything on just getting people up to speed in terms of managers or your own experience with that?
Yeah, I think managers are a lot more important than we give them credit for. And I think what we tell our managers and we empower them, like these folks were saying, you got to know your people, and everyone's different. You have to meet them where they are. But I think it is important to give guardrails, because I think what we learned during COVID is if you make kind of a gray statement, people want black and white. People want to know, well, what is the expectation? And so what we try and tell our managers is, as a company, here's our expectation. Here are the guardrails. But you need to work with each person to meet them where they're at. And I think that can go a long way. We do a survey every year. We have these, what they call my manager scores. My manager helps me learn and grow. My manager supports me. My manager makes my job easier, cares about my concerns. Those are our highest ranking statements in our company, and it's something that we're really proud of. And that's because we've empowered them to make decisions. It starts at the top, right? But you have to give them then the power to make it work for their team and their people and the single moms and I think the big thing for us is being transparent. If you're gonna do that on your team, I believe, you should let the other team members know as well. I think they'd actually appreciate that you did that for the team member. It's the right thing to do. And so I think you just have to be transparent.
Lisa?
No,
Any
I
thoughts?
agree with everything that's been said, and I go back to what I sort of call a psychological safety and creating that environment where people can feel like they can make a mistake, and that includes managers. Managers are people too, and they've had a tremendous burden put on them through this pandemic and working remotely, and they've really turned their lives upside down in a lot of ways, and making them feel safe, certainly equipping them with the tools and the resources and the guardrails. But helping them know that it's okay to make a mistake and you own up to it. And sometimes that's not only do you learn, but people learn from that, and they recognize, your team recognizes you're human too, and that is can be really beneficial for the whole organization.
Okay, great. Lisa, I'm going to call on you first in a moment, not in this one, but soon, because I know it's hard to follow on other people because it's like, well, everything they said, and so, but I mentioned connective tissue. So right now, especially in a hybrid environment, companies or teams are held together by managers. They're really the connective tissue, and that's hard to do. They maybe didn't have that burden before. One speaker at one of our events said one of the hardest things to do in business right now is any project that goes across teams or departments or lines. So Sarah, what are you seeing in terms of how do you help them connect?
Yeah. I interviewed a gentleman by the name of Tony Bond recently. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Great Place to Work. And he shared with me that through all of their research, what they've found over the last 2 years is that the role of manager has changed from decision maker to connector. And it's a huge leap for a lot of managers because it requires a lot of what we're talking about here. but especially for those of us that are managing teams that are in hybrid or virtual environments now, people are starting jobs, they haven't met anyone, they don't know where to go. And the role of the manager is to now facilitate all of these connections. And so I think it's like a new set of skills that we have not required in the past. And what we've been seeing in our sessions is just a huge increase in managers needing different levels of support that we've ever seen before. So it's a lot of what we're talking about here, like how do I figure out how to support people personally and professionally? But it's also like figuring out how to make your teams perform and be productive in these environments. So some of like the tactical ways that we're doing this is just truly in trying to drive them to build trust first. Like if you don't, like it seems so simple, but if you don't make that the number one thing that you build with the individuals on your team, you won't be able to then have them move quickly or figure out where they need to go, because they're not going to have that willingness to reach out to, you know, figure out what the next step needs to be. And so I think that's I've seen it on my own team where I had a new manager come to me and really talk about the performance not being there for one of the members of their team. And when I asked what their relationship was like, I got a lot of like, what do you mean? Like, it's fine, you know, it's great. Like, what do you know about her right now in terms of like what's going on, what she's struggling with? And all of that was absent. And it was just an aha moment for me, because that person was resistant to any of the suggestions that their manager was gonna make, which in this environment is so critical because we don't have the ability to get into a room, talk it out, or say, point to someone across the room and say, you know, talk to Jim over there, he'll help you figure it out. And so I think it's like the baseline foundation of everything that we're talking about today is building that trust. And that is a completely new paradigm shift in terms of how we look at managers. So now when I go to hire people, you know, obviously at the most senior levels at my company, these are things I'm looking for, but at every level now I'm looking at, does this person exhibit high levels of EQ? Are they gonna collaborate at the highest level? And are they going to be someone that others like want to put their trust in? And that's above any skill set, first and foremost.
Trust. Would any of you like to follow on that, on just creating connectors?
I wonder too if everyone else experiences this, where we promote the people who are the highest performers, right? Just because they perform exceptional doesn't mean they're leaders. So exactly what you said resonates with us, is because how do you find the skill set needed to be a leader, and how do you make sure that they don't just drive productivity and performance, they actually have this EQ, they have this empathy, they have this ability to actually get results done through leading others, not through executing themselves. So that's something that we're trying to chip away at, and we are focused on new managers because we know that when we studied them and we understood what really inspires you to learn, when we asked managers across the organization, it's two things. It's, I'm in a newer, challenging environment, something I haven't done before, or I've received some feedback. And so I think we also have the mechanisms to get feedback as well, which helps. But when you're a new manager, your willingness and ability to embrace that learning is so significant. But we're also trying to push the boundary further to say, well, how do we hire those people? Because some of these other traits can be learned, these skills that are technical, you can learn those. But I always say, if you're a good problem solver, you're a team player, and you have a learning mindset, we can teach you to do anything. And so that's really spot on. The challenge is the culture still needs to shift for people who say, well, you're an underwriter, so I expect you to be an underwriter to be a manager. And that's the culture even with our people. So how do we transition our people's mindset so they are looking for those different qualities versus, I expect you to be a technical expert if you're gonna lead me as a technical expert. So we're kind of chipping away at that a little bit.
Okay, anyone else want to speak up on that? Well, I have to say what you're saying about like some people making that just can't make the leap. From being a journalist, I just saw that reporters are not good managers, or there might be a few, but they're obsessive. They disappear for weeks at a time. You know, you can't have those people running the show. I wanted to get into one of the things that does create connections within companies, which is that sense of being engaged with a cause, something bigger than just the simple products you're putting out, the impact you might have on your communities. Chris, you're very involved. That's your thing. And
Yeah.
would you like to talk about that?
Sure. So what we found, and I think you probably all agree, the biggest driver of employee engagement is meaningfulness. And I think that can mean a few things. So for us, it can mean, how do I contribute to the success of Ace Hardware, right? Like, what is my role? We've had record-breaking success the last 2 years because everyone wanted to paint their walls during COVID and fix those things that have been broken for years, and you're sick of staring at them, which is great for us. But so every person at our corporate office, like, what was their role? What's the purpose? What's their purpose, right? So there's one bucket, that's the company success. But then beyond that, that bigger sense of purpose and meaningfulness. And I'm sure many of your companies have a charity of choice or a volunteer program. For us, we've had the same charitable partner. We have one for 31 years, and that's Children's Miracle Network Hospitals. And it's something our stores, so our 5,000 stores, are super passionate about, giving back to their local hospital. And so how did we bring that to our corporate office? It's ingrained in our culture. And we do a lot of storytelling. I think storytelling is important. We give them opportunities to give back. And not only giving the opportunity, so if you go back a few years, we had a volunteer policy. No one knew about it. It was in page 57 of the booklet. No one really asked about it. And so my team looked at it, we rewrote it, we brought it to our executive team. We didn't even know we had one, and said, not only should we have this, but we should give permission to use it. So I think that's a big one, is yes, you should tell your story and tell your company, philanthropic story, but then allow your employees to be part of it and give them permission to do it. So we give 20 hours paid time to give back. And we do set up opportunities that have to do with children's hospitals and what we're passionate about. But then we say, if you're passionate about something, use your volunteer time there. We don't dictate what they get to do. We set up opportunities. But again, it's our managers encouraging it. Take the time. We're giving you the time, especially these last 2 years. And we've had to be creative. Getting into a children's hospital these days is not happening. But how can we still give people that purpose and that meaningfulness and give them permission to do so? And then when we announce at the end of the year, we raised over $20 million last year. How did our employees play a role in that? And give them credit and give them kudos and make them feel like they're part of something bigger. So that's a huge part of our brand, giving back, helping in our communities, and something that we want our employees to take part in.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to add, I couldn't agree more relative to that. And it's one of the things, so Homethrive is basically, we're a company that provides other organizations a benefit around giving caregiver support. So for people who are taking care of elders or special needs kids, we can provide a benefit for those folks. And so the mission in our organization just drives so much value internally. I mean, we are an early stage company. We can't pay the best. We don't have the best benefit programs. I'm working on it, but there's only so much money to go around. But the people who come in are just so mission driven, and to be able to connect what they do. So even if you're in tech support, how that helps our members and their companies through that really gut-wrenching journey in a lot of cases. So yeah, couldn't agree with you more strongly.
Lisa, I want to come right back to you with the next question, which is about home life and caregiving. I noticed there was a story today about that women have, especially women 30 and under, have achieved pay equity with guys or better in 12 major cities, which is a breakthrough. But then when you add up all the other sort of equity issues, including being primary caregivers for not only their children, but maybe their parents and so on, or people with special needs, it's still a lot, and it's imbalanced. And I thought you might be able to reflect on that.
I do, and actually I'm going to just pull up, I grabbed some statistics because I think that there has always been an issue with caregiving responsibilities, and so much of that falling to women. 70% of caregivers are women. The pandemic, I think, really highlighted a lot of that. And I know you probably haven't seen much of the same research, but just to, in case anyone has missed some of these things, the women's labor force participation hit a 33-year low in January. The McKinsey study said 1 in 3 women are looking at downshifting their careers because of other things going on in their lives. And there was a recent study that 43% of respondents reported being distracted, worried, or focused on caregiving, not their jobs, for 5 or more hours per week. And so if we think, companies who aren't understanding the impact of this, the economists are predicting that the exodus of women from the workforce will siphon $885 billion out of the US economy in the next 2 years. So it is a critical issue. It is not just a human issue, it is a business issue, it is an economic issue. And sorry, I get really passionate about this. And so anything that I think organizations can do to help people going through that journey is just so important. And so things around flexible work, and that doesn't just mean working remotely, although that's certainly a piece of it, but even things in terms of letting people have some control over the hours that they work. So maybe they need to stop and not work between 10 and 12 or something, but they're reconnecting in the evening hours, but giving them some control over kind of when they work. Giving people opportunities to just take some time to do like deep thinking work. The burnout factor is just so high across this country, and everyone is experiencing it. Managers, I think, in particular, because they're being squeezed so hard. But it's a huge factor. So giving people kind of that to say, take a clarity break. One company I worked at, 4 hours every Wednesday, no meetings, doing no meeting Fridays, so again, giving some people the opportunity to just get things done in a quiet way, and that's okay. So the flexibility, I think, is just absolutely critical. Doing other things around, certainly the Homethrive benefit about caregiving, but parental leave, giving people time to take when there's a birth, adoption, fostering a child, that they need to take care of a sick child or a sick family member. So making sure that people have paid benefits. Even for a company as small as ours in an early stage, that doesn't cost you anything. They're on your labor force anyway. So yes, they're going to be out, but as I always say to people, like, how would they're going to miss 12 weeks of work? What would happen if they got hit by a bus? Look, at the end of the day, we would figure it out. So figure it out, we'll get through it. But giving people that time so that they can bond with their new child, so that they can take care of a sick relative, whatever the case may be. So it's another, huge component. And then I think, again, going back to a lot the manager and helping managers through this as well. This is uncharted territory for a lot of folks. And so helping them, with the skills, just coaching them, giving them the guidance. If you've got the resources to provide mentorship opportunities, both for them as well as for other folks. We do a lot around sort of informal career pathing for people. Again, we don't have a lot of real traditional programs available, but things that we can do to help give people exposure to other, to high level or people in the organization, or remote workplace. But so doing skip level meetings, doing things to give people some exposure and opportunity to really grow their careers in the sort of framework that works for them is just some of the things that not only we're doing, but we're seeing a lot of our customers across the country are doing as well. And then things like meal kits and meal stipends, or even like one of our customers does like a housekeeping stipend and things like that to help people again balance everything that's going on in their lives.
Well, thanks. Corey, I want to ask you about how do you get people to speak up on this? How do you get the feedback? What kind of structures can companies create to not only give permission, but give them kind of a venue and so on to talk about these things?
So something that's been interesting that I did previous company, now a new company, is I know a lot of companies have employer resource groups, and although it gives space for certain communities to have supportive communities and everything else, one of the challenges I've always found is, does it give an opportunity first to get people to cooperate and engage across cultural lines? Probably even more important, and I've always said this, and it sounds harsh, but I feel like if you're having a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and cisgender straight white men are not a part of the conversation, you're not really having a conversation. And it's because nothing can change an organization. DEI at its root, and this is just period, it's about power and position. If you want to see change in an organization, you need to have greater diversity in positions that matter, and decisions have to change. And so one of the things I've done, again, previous company, this company, is we created a different model for the employer resource groups, and where we still have our cultural identity groups, so we still have them for pride and these different groups, but we create this whole new system of collaborative groups. And the idea was this: it does no good for Women's History Month where we have a great program about all the great achievements about women, sponsor this event, and only women show up. It's good for the women, but it's probably bad for the people who need to hear it. And so our cultural identity groups, they only have 3 purposes now. And those 3 purposes are to create a community space for that particular group, kind of support system. Second, to help in recruiting, because they may have a greater network of people within that. And third is your insights about different policies and procedures that we need to change in the company. So for working parents, good example is that is the greatest subject matter. You want to know what you need to do for parental benefits? Ask parents. All the rest of the things we did, we moved to these collaborative groups. So we have groups like cultural celebrations. This group sponsor all different cultural celebrations: Women's History Month, Pride, Black History Month. And so it is encouraging employees to engage in this work across cultural boundaries, to work on these kind of things. Career development. So rather than having 18 different mentoring programs for women, blacks, and everything else, they work on mentoring for all across. And what I found is when we created this new collaborative structure that didn't have these cultural identity groups and net titles, that not only were they starting to work together, but we actually started getting more cisgender, white, straight men get involved, because they didn't feel like there was this hurdle, this barrier to, it doesn't feel comfortable for me to show up to these groups. Even though it says in allies, there was still this feeling like I'm infringing in your territory by showing up. And so now with the collaborative groups, majority of the collaborative groups actually have more non-minority people helping lead their groups, because they found a way to get engaged in the conversation. So that's been really productive, creating space. Second is the realization that post George Floyd, people are afraid. There are a lot of people who are afraid to say the wrong things. There are a lot of I talk to my white colleagues like, I'm not showing up to say a thing because I'm gonna say the wrong thing. And so how do we create space for people to be able to have conversations and even potentially mess up and not feel like they're gonna jump on it? And so we're creating these smaller communities of, let's create this space where you can come and ask questions and have the kind of conversation you wish you could have without this fear of like, I'm gonna be torn down if I ask to say the wrong thing. And so these smaller communities are helping change that space. And the last thing we've done is something called thoughtful tension. And it's kind of a fun activity where people get to gather in a room like this with no chairs, and we throw these prompts on the screen where there's 2 extremes. So like, am I more likely to stand up for my own community or help other communities in need? And people kind of move in the room based on which way they feel in the continuum. You just can't choose the center. And people get to express their point of view about why I've chosen what I've chosen. And it's interesting because not only are they engaging in conversations, but by listening to each other, you practice empathy. And in some cases, people move. Like after hearing your viewpoint, I hadn't thought about it in that way. And so I've done that experiment around the world in different countries. And what I find is the conversation continues even after the exercise ends, because people are now finding the space to communicate and talk and get beyond the surface. And so I think bottom line is we have to create opportunities for people to get beyond the surface and get to engage. You cannot do DEI without engaging with people who are different than yourselves. You can read books, you can watch movies, but there's nothing that takes the place of developing relationships with people who are not like you.
That sounds great. The whole collaborative groups idea is not something I've heard a lot, and we do a lot of conferences. It seems like it's really a way of connecting, breaking down walls. It seems like a whole different way of doing things. We have, in the 8 minutes we have left, I have 4 really good questions, so we're going to do it like a speed round. So, Melissa, high performance teams need some level of conflict. How do you emphasize the positive kind of conflict rather than the toxic kind?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me ask the audience, who here enjoys conflict? Raise your hand. Okay, a couple, good. Most of us avoid it, right? It doesn't always feel good. And we know the difference between productive and toxic conflict. And there's actually a study that's been done with groups where there's people who are very similar and they think alike and they're paired together, and people who are diverse and different and have different perspectives. And they both have the same exact, what do you need to do and here are your objectives. And the team who feels better about their results is the team that's more alike, right? They thought, oh, it was great, we all agreed, it was fun, I loved it, right? But the productive team, the team that achieved better results, was the team that was different. And they didn't enjoy the experience at all until you get to the end, and then you realize because we're different, because we have these different ideas and perspectives, we actually got to a better place. It may not feel good while you're getting there, potentially, But I think that's the really important thing, that you cannot have high performance without conflict. You just can't. And everyone agreeing with each other and not sharing different perspectives, you simply can't be innovative. You can't be creative. You can't drive better business outcomes. You're going to continue to do the same thing over and over again. And guess what? Eventually you're obsolete, right? So I think that's really important. High-performing teams create that sustainable mechanism where they can not just hit, but outperform their objectives time and time again. And really what's at the anchor of that is a learning mindset, where problems and failures are viewed as opportunities to learn and grow and improve. But really what's most important is the psychological safety. Lisa talked about it, we talked about it, is creating that space where people can challenge each other's ideas, not necessarily the person, but challenge each other's ideas and thoughts and perspectives, and ask really good questions to each other versus kind of attacking each other. And I think when you know that's true is when your team as a manager is challenging you, challenging your ideas and perspectives, and they feel comfortable and confident enough that they can say, hey, wait a second, Melissa, I actually think differently. Okay, and that's really important to be able to create that space for that safety. I think as leaders, too, to be able to do that, you have to challenge your own instinct to respond quickly. You're a problem solver, you're good at what you do, you're an expert often. You have all the answers, right? That's why you're the manager. You have to take that trap and just flip it. You have to think about, what are the questions that I can ask? Even if I don't agree, how do I make sure everyone has a voice? And how do I ask some good questions like, who else has an idea? Or will this make it better and not just different? How do you see that? And so really being sure that you're not quick to respond and shut people down, because I promise when you do, they're never going to share another idea again, and you're going to be back into that place where you have harmony, but you're not getting sustainable performance.
That's great. The productive team sounds like being on jury duty. It's like, oh, those people, but I'm glad I did it, sort of thing. Yeah, it's just conflict. Sarah, I think we're at the point in 2022 that people kind of accept the case that diversity, equity, and inclusion is that there's a business case for it, and the bottom line. Is there one for running a business with compassion? Is it good for the bottom line?
Absolutely. And I think that I'm going to tie it back to DIB, though, because I think everything that we've just talked about has to be looked through the lens of the individual. So you can't have a compassionate culture if you're not thinking about how each person's identity, home life, past experience impacts how they show up at work. This is something that I'm like crazy passionate about because I have a biracial family, and I think about like, how are my daughters going to be accepted in the workplace when they arrive there? And we aren't there. And I think that it's on the managers right now, it's on the organizations to train the managers to think very clearly and deeply about what each person needs to be successful. And we've approached it in the past in a very blanketed way. Like, we're gonna offer all of the same things to each of you, but that's not the way forward at all. And it's through compassion, because understanding your needs personally versus mine is a way of expressing that. And again, they'll all leave if you don't do it this way, so.
All of you have experience, well, among the mix of you, with working for big established companies that have been around for a long time, and also some startups too, and some of you in both. I'll start with Chris and Lisa. You work for two very different size companies that way. Mm-hmm. Chris, what are some of the obstacles in reforming this kind of compassionate culture in a long-established company?
A big company, yeah. Again, I think it really has to start from the top. And when you work in a big company, that's just the reality, is that you feel kind of trickle-down effect and you're giving permission, like I said. And so we're very blessed to have a very compassionate president and CEO, and he speaks very candidly about it, and I think that's very meaningful to folks to hear it from all the way to the top. I think, yes, it's probably even more important to hear it from your manager. However, it feels good when your leader at the very top is saying things and acknowledging your situation. And our president often speaks about his belief in a servant heart. And that's something that people use those words a lot in our company, that having a servant heart, and what does that mean, and giving permission to have that. that to me is incredibly important, especially in a large global company where every office is probably a little different, every one of our stores is different, but at the very top, he makes it clear about what are the expectations of our culture and expectations of our people and how we treat each other. And I think that's incredibly important.
Thanks, Lisa.
I echo that, and I think one of the advantages of being at a more established company is sometimes there are resources to really sort of put programs in place and standardize things and have more resources and tools. But one of the real beauties of being part of an earlier stage company is that there's just a willingness to try different things. There is the ability to pivot really, really quickly. Most of the organizations, the startups that I've been part of, it's like fail fast. Like, let's try it. We don't have all the answers. Try it. If it doesn't work, we try something else. And again, I think people, when they see that it's okay to make a mistake, it just creates a whole different sort of very transparent, very caring culture. It's like we're human and we can work. It's okay to be human.
Corey, you've worked back to back at two fast-growing companies. Is there room for, like, in scaling up so fast for humanity as well?
I hope so. I guess I quickly say this. I got 30 seconds. I think all this comes down to, I think most people have a great intention of how they want to show up, but their blind spots sometimes prevent them from doing it the right way, and there's an impact that's different. And so I just think we have to meet people where they are, help people to feel comfortable understanding their blind spots, so they can figure out how they can show up and understand that what their actions can actually have a major impact in a negative way. But it's okay if you wanted to own it, live it, and do better.
Well, as a moderator, I can't have a blind spot because there's a big sign right here that says 000. So I think that means we're out of time. I interpret it that way. Thank you all. This was great. Thanks for sharing all your stories.
Thank you.